I was grossly overweight. Apparently, I developed a lesion in the temporal lobe of my brain. Once I was taking my son to school and I was driving back and I ran into an uncompleted building.
Wow.
Yes. The only other option I had was to die. First of all, of course, my license was seized. My memory was seriously impaired, but I needed to live. I needed to live. I would say to most young people, find your motivation. What has died in a lot of people is actually motivation. Many of us are living in the moment. Everything has to happen now. I think the first thing that everybody needs to do is
Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to Good Day wherever you are. You're welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, the Connecting Deep with Miles podcast. And I'm very excited to bring you another episode. I have a phenomenal guest with me today. I have worked with her. I have known her for a couple of years. And I think that this episode is one that will be very significant. You know, it will be... Our guest today has a very powerful personal story that all of us are going to be able to learn from and draw strength from. So I'm going to be introducing our guest in a bit. Our guest today is a lawyer. She's a counseling psychologist. She has a doctorate in psychology. She is the CEO and founder of BTH Integrated Wellness and Therapy. She currently lives and works in the UK. She works with Medicef, where she provides culturally relevant therapy for sub-Saharan Africans. She is a member of the Nigerian Psychological Association. She's a member of the American Psychological Association, and she's a chartered member of the British Psychological Association. So she provides, wellness services for employees of organizations like MTN, Andela, ExxonMobil, Total, UBA, just to name a few. And I'm so excited, guys, to welcome Dr. Chiadi Ndu. You're very welcome, ma.
Thank you so much, Miles. Thank you very much. I could hardly recognize myself.
I'm very excited to have you on this episode. I mean, we've known each other for a while. We've worked together, and it's always fun to work with Dr. Ndu. It's absolute fun. She has energy. I don't think she knows, but she has a lot of energy. She gives off this, there's just positive vibes, and she's fun to be around.
Thank you,
yes. So once again, you're welcome. Just like last week's guest, I'll say I'm very fortunate because again, she doesn't live in Nigeria, and I happened to just get her at the right time when she was around. So, Doctor, you're welcome.
Thank you, Miles.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
All right. So tell us a bit about yourself, your background. Yeah.
Okay. So, like you said, my name is Chiadi Ndu.
Okay.
It wasn't always. I was Chiadi Okeke for for a few years, and then I got married, and I'm married to an exceptionally impressive gentleman.
Nice.
If I had to do it again, I'd still do it with him.
Wow.
Yes,
Nice.
I was called to the Nigerian bar in 1987.
Okay.
But life happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're doing something because back in my day, if you were an art student, you're either if you were a science student, you were a doctor, an engineer.
Okay.
In fact, what you always heard is, you have to study a professional course. So, of course, because I was an art student and I was brilliant enough, what was there to study apart from law?
Okay.
And I went ahead and studied law. But even when I finished, I knew that, I knew that it wasn't really for me. It was just what I did because I was expected to do it. Along the way, I often say that a lot of study, a lot of research is actually me-search. There was a gap in my life that didn't just quite sink, I knew that there was a missing link, should I say, for want of a better word. And I'm a Christian, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, so I remember in one service, it was Dr. Tony Rapper, and it was early in the 90s, and he preached a sermon called The Healing of Memories. Listen, my life changed totally that day. That was the day I realized that there were gaps. There were places I had shut down. There were things I had buried in the realm of the unconscious. There were hurts that hadn't been. I just knew there was much more that I needed to investigate. And I felt it was psychology. I felt a leading, towards psychology. I felt a leading actually towards counseling. But a friend of mine said to me, don't come and go and become those Jankara counselors. You better study and study well, And I thought that's sensible, because there are a lot of people that say they're counselors and they don't have education, they don't have training. And I went back to school and I started to study psychology. And Miles, I want to say to you that not only has that helped me obtain closure in so many areas of my life, it's helped me make sense, of experiences. And more than anything, has helped me help people to make sense of where they're coming from.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get right into it. So you studied law, but you later made this transition into the world of psychology and wellness and all of that. And I know that there's a personal story behind all of this. There's something that happened to you as a child, that made you become a certain kind of person and led you down a certain path. And that to a large extent almost took your life. Yeah. And you had to take your life back. So could you tell us that story? What happened,
Okay, so I grew up in a normal family.
Okay.
I grew up in the eastern part of Nigeria, Enugu.
Okay.
If anybody knows Enugu, they know that it's a civil service town. It's a kind of town your daddy goes to work, your mommy goes to work, everybody comes back by 3, you have dinner, you have siesta. I don't know whether those kind of phrases still exist, Everybody comes back and watches the news at 7, then 9 o'clock. And, just a normal, stable. What I'm trying to emphasize here is stability. It was a regular life, And my father worked with the public service, and it was a very comfortable life, Then one day, Miles, it was another regular day. Mom, myself, and my 3 sisters went out. So I have a set of triplet sisters, and there's quite a wide gap between myself and them. We went out for a regular day. Came back. Mom went to have her hair done, but she mentioned a headache. She said to me, "Isina awam." I'm saying it in Igbo, that means I have a headache. And I'm like, okay. I mean, big deal. Then in the middle of the night, I hear this shriek. Chiadi, call your father. My head. And I call my father, and my father rushes to her, takes her to the hospital. And on her way to the hospital, she said to me, take care of your sisters. Miles, honestly, for the life of me, I didn't take it as anything, honest. Because, being the older sister, I heard that it was rhetorical, take care of your sisters, mind your sisters, So I just thought it was a regular take care of your sisters. And she never came back. She never came back.
Wow.
And
how old were you at this time?
I was 13.
Wow.
I was 13. And my sisters were about 7. 7, 8. Yeah, about that. And but there was a peculiarity about that situation, because the year before, my father had lost his mother, his father, and another person in the family. So there'd been a series of funerals, and and everybody was worried about him.
Wow.
How is he going to cope? And each time people came to offer their condolences, they'd call me aside and say to me, you have to be very careful about your father. You can't cry in front of him. You have to be very strong. Your sisters need you. Your father cannot see you cry. Everybody will break down. You have to really be tough. And I didn't realize how horrified the thought of losing my father or anything happening to my sisters was until many, many years later. And my child mind kicked into action. I just knew there was no time to slack, no time to stand and stare.
Wow.
You
Wow.
just had to get on with the business of being a mom and the business of being a wife to your father. Because if something happens to him, you are an orphan, and you are an orphan with 3 baby sisters and a mandate to take care of your baby sisters.
So you were 13.
Yes, 13.
And, at this, I mean, for most teenagers at 13, you're getting into your teens, you're trying to discover yourself,
What
you're
are
trying to
you
navigate.
talking?
And you couldn't even be a normal teenager.
No.
You had to carry this responsibility
No, I
of
couldn't.
looking out for your sisters and making sure your dad was fine.
Yeah.
Wow. So how did this, so how did this affect you? How were you able to do this successfully?
So, a lot of the time, people say to other people, you are an old soul. You're so wise. You're wise beyond your years. And they think that it's actually a compliment. But it isn't. What you're saying to that child is you've missed a chunk of being a child. And life is transitional. It is important that you pass through the developmental stages. I was robbed of that opportunity. I didn't have an opportunity to be a child in the proper sense of not caring about life, And apart from that, a couple of other things happened, Miles. I don't share this very regularly, but I'll share it with you.
Okay.
My father was a politician
Okay.
at this time. My sisters now had gone to school in the UK. I was in the university. I got into university pretty early.
Okay.
So about 16, but I was already in the university. And there was a military regime. I can't remember. I think it was Idi Agbon and Buhari. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. Were you born then? Okay. So Idi Agbon and Buhari, and they rounded up all the politicians and they threw them in jail. They were waiting trial, So my father was incarcerated, awaiting trial for about 12 months, if my memory serves me right.
Wow.
Yes. So at that age, I literally didn't have a father and I didn't have a mother. And I had the responsibility of going to the prison to visit my father.
Wow.
Yes. I can remember very clearly there was this building that they had, they tried them,
Okay.
And I'd have to, anytime thankfully he was acquitted or he wasn't found guilty. There was nothing. He was discharged, yes.
Okay.
Yes, he was discharged, that's the word, But each time they were going to be investigated, they'd pack all of them in some black Maria and bring them to, I think it was the legislative building then in Enugu. I was in the University of Benin. Nobody would know. I'd have to enter public transport, whether it's night or day, so that I'll be able to catch him.
Wow.
And be able to say hello to him during the trials.
That must have been traumatic.
It was awful. It was awful. It was awful, And by the way, for my dissertation, I studied effect of adverse childhood experiences on young adults, and it was a result of that.
Wow.
I didn't realize how traumatized I was.
You were.
But I was an accident waiting to happen.
This is quite interesting because I've always said this, that many young people, even old people underestimate the impact of childhood experiences, things they went through in their past, and how some of these things might be, they're deeply psychological, they are subconscious, they are emotional, and they show up later in life, one way or the other.
Yep.
They could show up in our behavior, in our actions. Sometimes they show up in our health. So how did this entire experience, losing your mother, having to bear the responsibility for making sure that everybody else was fine when you were not fine yourself, and maybe no one was looking out for you, and then having to deal with the fact that your father was embattled, and he was kept somewhere, you'd have to leave school. I mean, this is a lot. How did this show up in your life later?
Okay, so like I said to you, I didn't even know, until I heard that sermon that all these things were piling up or had piled up. Whenever I think about mental health, I think about a container. It keeps filling up, filling up, filling up until one day it tips. Thankfully, it didn't tip in my mental health, but it tipped in my body. Fast forward 20 years later, it was another ordinary day. By now, I had married, I'd had children, and I was on a flight from the UK to Lagos.
Okay.
And they had announced the landing, and I bent down to pray, And the next thing I heard, from the very back of my head, I heard them saying, "Is there a doctor on this flight? Is there a doctor on this flight? Can you please come to the front? We need your attention." Then I heard a host of British Airways stewards, air hostesses, saying to me, "Are you okay, ma'am? Are you all right, madam? Are you epileptic? You just had a seizure. You just had a convulsion. Are you all right?" And I'm like, it was still from the back of my mind. Anyway, long and short of it, I had gone into a convulsive fit.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was a seizure, and they had to come and take me, and there was an ambulance waiting for me. I didn't even know there was a medical facility at the airport.
Our Nigerian, the Lagos
Mauritala
airport.
Mohammed
Wow.
Airport.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
So there was an ambulance waiting for me at the tarmac, which took me to the medical facility.
Okay.
But by then I had gained consciousness, and I was saying, no, I don't have. Anyway, that was the beginning of 20 years of horror.
Wow.
Apparently, I thought it was a one-off.
Okay.
You know how you've had the experience and it's gone.
Okay.
But apparently, I developed a lesion in the temporal lobe of my brain that nobody nobody knew why, and nobody could figure, and I began treatments. I was there's in seizure conditions, there's something that they call the grand mal. The grand mal is when you have fits, and so that was it. They were able to control that after a couple of months, but they were not able to control the ones they call petit mal, the absences. So Miles, I could be talking with you, and the next minute I'd zone out.
Wow.
I wouldn't know what I was saying. I wouldn't know. In fact, at a point, it affected my memory immensely. At a point, I forgot my children's names. I remember more than once coming out of my bedroom, dressed up, and I'd forget where I was going. Mind you, I was still in my 30s,
Wow.
Yeah. I'd come out, I'd forget where I was going. And once I was taking my son to school. It was White Sands, we're living in Lekki Phase 1. And I dropped him, thankfully, and I was driving back. And I had one of those absences. And I ran into an uncompleted building.
Wow.
Another day, I was on Admiralty Way. I was going to pick something from Tantalizer, or someone from the Tantalizer. I ran into a NEPA pole.
Wow.
Which fell right on top of the car. But thankfully, it was a big car, so the airbag protected.
Sort of shielded you. Yeah.
The most ridiculous part of this experience is you're in a trance. I came out from the car and continued walking, oblivious to where I was going.
Wow.
Yep. Sometimes I could be exercising, that like
the bridge.
The bridge, yeah. I could be walking on the road and I wouldn't know. I'll trip off and I'll start walking on the, on the pavement. So even for my physical exercises, I had to have a partner.
Wow.
So if my husband wasn't going to be walking with me, I had to take my house help to walk with me. And yet life had to go on.
Wow.
Life had to go on.
So and I'm sure this must have, it wasn't just in situations like that, maybe even in professional settings, did you experience things like that?
Okay, so I pride myself to be eloquent and a speaker.
Yes, you are.
So I continued to talk, I had I just didn't want to give up on life. It was too difficult to just stop living.
Okay.
I once or twice had been on a podium speaking and I had an absence.
Wow.
I literally stuttered and I was going to fall. Thankfully, my husband was there and he got me. And of course, it meant that it was over. I couldn't, because when I have those absences or those, I can't coordinate for another 10, 20 minutes.
Wow.
It was anxiety provoking because you didn't know what could trigger it. You didn't know how, you didn't know when, Miles, it was harrowing. It was, I felt it was not fair.
Okay. So
I felt it was not fair.
I mean, this is mind blowing. So, at what point did you decide? Because so at this point you had this, the lesion and everything that came with it. Were there any other things? Were where you, I don't know, were they? Yeah.
You mean my health?
Your health.
Oh
yeah.
yes. Okay, so I don't know whether I've ever read this book by Bessel van der Kolk, the trauma expert.
Okay.
Says the body keeps the score. Every so anxiety has impacts your body. The final straw for me. Okay, in the middle of this, I was on very strong medication to control the seizures.
Yeah.
I fell pregnant. Mind you, my oldest son was about 17. My younger one was about 12. And I fell pregnant. And my doctors were like, one of those babies that you don't know, oh gosh. But she's such a bonus. So it's a privilege. And she's my only girl child.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I fell pregnant, and the possibility of the child becoming disabled.
Okay. So maybe Down syndrome or
Down
something.
syndrome, cerebral palsy, was that the cleft upper lip was the mildest. Was very high. Because of the strength of the medication I was placed on.
Wow.
So the doctors said to me, you're going to... So it was now a choice. Do you stop the medication so that the child is fine? Or do you terminate the pregnancy so you don't have a deformed child? Or do you continue and take the risk?
Wow.
My doctor said it's out of the question. It would be responsible of me to stop your medication. So if you want to have the baby, it's your take, It was a very difficult decision, because this was me going to make a decision for another person's life, And so I couldn't stop the medication. I take the medication. The child has a very high percentage chance of being malformed. In fact, I remember one doctor saying to me, "Well, Mrs. Ndu, it's absolutely your call, But I just want you to know that there's no space in today's world for disabled children."
Wow. The doctor actually said that.
Yes, he said that. He was being very kind, actually. He thought he was giving me,
advice.
good information. He's like, there's no space in today's world for deformed children. Of course, that decided it for me. I was gonna terminate the pregnancy. Miles, I did go to do the procedure.
Okay.
But during the ultrasound, they needed to scan to check where the exact position of the fetus was, so they could evacuate appropriately. And I saw the heart beating. And I thought, no, it's not just a fetus. This is life.
It's life.
And I said to the doctors, I can't. I won't be able to. I'll chest it. And I went ahead with the pregnancy, and I have the most adorable, beautiful daughter.
That's amazing.
She is so beautiful.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay,
she is so beautiful.
So coming back to you, and how did you? Because you had to do something. Obviously, you had these health issues mounting. You were on this heavy medication. Yeah.
So I now gave birth to this child.
Okay.
And I was nurturing her and taking care of her. But I was grossly overweight. I was not well.
What did you weigh at your biggest?
Oh dear, my biggest. Do you want to know?
For context, I mean, right now you're looking sweet 16. So,
okay.
For context, yeah.
I was almost 100 kilograms.
Wow.
Yes, I was almost 100 kilograms. Almost. Bad days, I could tip over. Good days, it could be about 97, 98. And so I went for a routine, one of those headaches. And I went and they said, I'm sorry, madam, your blood pressure is elevated and we may have to place you on blood pressure medications. And I just thought to myself, no way, not on your life. You're not going to do this thing to this girl. So you're going to allow what you experienced to happen to this child. Chiadi, wake up, smell the coffee, take control of your weight, because it was weight induced.
Okay.
And I said to the doctor, so what do I need to do? He said, well, if you can lose weight and come back, then we can check and see whether we'll put you on the medications or whether the blood pressure had started to drop. So Miles, I promise you, it was motivated by I'm not letting my daughter pass through what I passed through.
Wow.
I must be available to take care of her.
So when you say not letting your daughter pass through what you pass through, you're talking about losing your mom?
Yep. Not
early?
not having maternal nurture and not having maternal involvement. It's I must give it to my mom's sisters.
Okay.
They were exceptional. They gave it their best.
Okay.
But Miles, you can only do what you can do.
Yeah.
They had responsibilities to their own children.
Yeah.
And they were available, but I missed having a mother. It was hard.
Wow.
There were so many little things that, no, you don't. Very intimate. They're very intimate things that other girls knew.
Yeah.
And they knew just because their mom told them. I had no idea. I had no idea. Little sanitary situation, just those kind of little things that only your mom can tell you.
Exactly.
I had no clue. So, and I always joke that the only way I learn is by making mistakes. So I bungle through everything, but somehow I get there.
You get there.
Oh yes, I learned how to cook by burning. I learned how to clean by messing up. I learned how to be a mother by not
just trying,
just getting on with it.
Yes.
In fact, even breastfeeding my first child, I didn't know how to breastfeed. I didn't know that there was a particular way you put the breast. Nobody told me. I was just, and I had my first child quite early. I mean, me and my babies, my sisters would try to bath the child. Sometimes the child would sink into the water. Sometimes, we were just playing.
Wow, that's quite interesting.
It was horrible.
Yeah.
Within about 2 months, I had to stop breastfeeding because the nipple was sore. Because I wasn't doing it well. I didn't know the areola. It was just
how to make the baby properly latch on.
Latch on, that's the word. Latch on. I didn't have any clue. So I thought, it was a joke. We were just playing house.
All right, so let's go back to you. And so you're at this point where, you were having these blackouts, you were also diagnosed with high blood pressure and you were going to be put on medication. And you said you, at that point, made a decision that, no, Chadi, things have to change. You're not going to leave this world. You're going to be there for your daughter and for your family. So what did you do? What changes did you make?
A total lifestyle overhaul, Miles. Total lifestyle overhaul. So like I mentioned my mom's sisters.
Yeah.
They were very present in my life. I had one and she was, into wellness, eating right, holistic, And I called her, I said, Auntie, this is what is happening. She said, I've been telling you. Anyway, she told me about this woman who does totally natural things. She's a nutritionist and it's purely natural. I got the woman into my house for 2 weeks. Miles, first week she said detoxing. So we're drinking garlic, ginger, so raw, ugu, bitter leaf, So I wasn't eating any cooked food.
Wow.
Within 1 week, she stayed in my home. She's quite expensive, I must say. Within 1 week, she stayed in my home. My medication, I slashed my medication into 2 without any doctor's because clearly the dose that I was taking was too,
It's too
much.
Mm.
And that was the path.
Mm.
Gradually.
Gradually.
And I always say to people, becoming sick is a process. Becoming well is a
also a
process.
process,
It's not
yeah.
an open and a shut thing. When she finished with me, I said, you have to. I went back to school. I went to Institute of Integrative Nutrition in New York to
Okay.
study nutrition and wellness. That overhauled my life. For instance, I don't do preservatives.
Okay.
Nope. All the food I eat, or at least I was eating, now I'm a bit naughty. All the food I was eating had to be in its natural form. I didn't do processed foods.
Okay.
I ate only things that were local because I didn't trust, like when you buy if you live in Nigeria and you buy an apple from the UK,
Yeah.
that apple, when the man that was hawking it, it doesn't spoil. When it came from in the container,
It spent how many months in the container?
it didn't spoil.
Yeah.
When it came, it became suspicious. What is making this thing not spoil? Meanwhile, if I buy my ube that was grown locally and I keep it there, in 3 days it's become soggy.
Yeah.
I knew that those things were dangerous. I said, you know what? I'm keeping it local.
Okay.
I'm keeping it. I literally overhauled my eating. Miles, in about 2 years, I became too thin.
Wow.
Yes.
Too thin.
I became, from that 100, in about 2 years, there was a time I was weighing about 65 kilograms.
Wow.
From almost 100 years. It was bad.
That's massive.
No, it was bad. So what had happened was the kind of eating, and I was eating.
Okay.
But I just was eating right. There was portion control.
Okay.
And I was eating the right things. So, for instance, I would never boil ugu. I'll blend ugu and drink. I was drinking things like bitter leaf. For swallow, I do cabbage. Turn cabbage into, for or unripe plantain. I mean oil. I got oil straight from the village. The girl that was living with me, her mom was a farmer in the village, a petty farmer. So I'd get my oil straight from the village. I didn't eat any of those processed rice. So if you see in my house, we'll be picking rice, stoned from rice. If I had to eat starch, it had to be whole, untampered with sort of food. Yes.
So you made all these changes to your diet, to your lifestyle, exercise.
Yep. Nothing vigorous.
Yeah.
By the way, before I fell ill, I was an exercise sort of person. But a couple of times, when I used to have blackouts frequently, I'd go to the treadmill to work out twice. I'd fallen on the treadmill.
Wow.
Yes. I know those things are very dangerous.
Very dangerous, so.
I'd fallen on the treadmill. Once it was in Ikoyi Club. I think maybe they even banned me. And then I had a little gym in my house. I had fallen on the treadmill in my house.
Wow.
Big scars on my knees, So I became afraid of working out. So all I could do was
just walk.
Brisk walking. And it's become a part of it. I just do the brisk walking and the stretches and a couple of, nothing heavy. I do.
Okay, so what happened? What did you notice? I mean, with all those medical conditions, what's happened since then?
So, first of all, of course, my license was seized.
Okay.
I was not permitted to drive anymore. I was not permitted to swim because if you had a seizure swimming, that's it.
That's it.
I was, my memory was seriously impaired. But I needed to live. I needed to live. In the middle of that, I registered to go back to school and study psychology. The first day I got into my master's class, when I'll be looking at the book, they say the words will be swimming. I couldn't make sense of sentences. I remember I stood in front of that class and I called my husband and I was weeping. I said, there's no way I can do this. I don't even know how to fill this form. I can't remember. He said, just if it's hard, just come home. It's okay. Then he said, okay, you can bring the form, I'll help you fill it. So he helped me fill it. He said, you can go again, just try. Miles, to do that master's. The only sense, the only part of my sensory system that I didn't use to study was my taste. Because you can't taste book. I used feeling. So I'll read. I will say it so I could hear it. So I'm using my eyes, sight. I'm using
touch.
my touch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for touch, I will take what I read, summarize it in my own words so that the kinestics, every part of, so the feeling. So if I forget what I saw, I remember what I heard. If I forget what I heard, this is how I studied. And I went on like this until I did my doctorate.
Wow.
But towards the end of my doctorate, I became well enough, right?
Wow. So you're off the drugs, you're off the medication. Yeah.
To be fair,
Yeah.
the illness is under control.
Okay.
I do not need to take the drugs, but I am careful.
Yeah. Well understood.
Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's
just
like
to be sensible.
it's like you're no longer hypertensive, but you don't want to. I mean, you don't want to not do your drugs because you don't know what could trigger.
Yeah.
But the critical thing for me is I do a lot of supplements.
Okay.
I don't play with my vitamin Ds. I don't play with my vitamin Cs. I don't play with my vitamins, my diet, and most especially my lifestyle. I avoid any form of stress. I was able to isolate anxiety as my major trigger. When in the process of getting better, and I'm not joking, all I needed to think about, oh my goodness, I hope I don't have a blackout, and I'll have one instantly.
Wow.
Once I just said, oh God, I hope nothing happens, it's going to happen instantly. So clearly, the thinking about it spirals,
Will trigger
anxiety. Anxiety will trigger cortisol, adrenaline, all the things, and it happens instantly. So I noticed a direct link between the thought of and the anxiety
and the manifestation.
The manifestation. My husband would say to me, then don't think about it now. Stop thinking about it. And I'm sure you know that once you're trying not to think about something, you are thinking about that thing. So it was just a mess. But I needed to restrain my stressors.
Fantastic. So I want to ask this question because there are many young people, and this has been a whole journey for you, you know, coming from that young teenager that had to carry this responsibility and later on the impacts begun to show in your life and all of that. Now, I'm wondering where you found the resilience, you know, the willpower, because there are many people, and when it comes to health issues these days, and I'm saying this because in reality, we need to be healthy to pursue our dreams. We need to be healthy to do the things that we want to do, to live a certain quality of life. I think I read somewhere recently that when you are well, you know, you focus on many things, but when you're not well,
you focus on being well.
Yes, on being well. So if you're going to pursue our dreams, we need to be healthy and all of that. And you have many young people that in this generation, I mean, some of the sicknesses, diseases that people would have maybe in their 50s or 60s, we're seeing them showing up in our 20s even. I was talking to a doctor recently, and he was talking about 20-something-year-olds that are battling with high blood pressure, things like that. And sometimes, a lot of the time, you can actually do something about it. You can make some changes that, if do not, you know, totally eliminate the issue, will put it under very good control, which is fine. So, but then a lot of people do not have the willpower, the resilience, or people start and stop, you know, kind of thing. It's almost like people having New Year's resolutions, and you know, they're very motivated for the first week and the second week, and after that they fall away. Meanwhile, these things are very important. So how were you able to stay on track? How were you able to find the discipline to do what needed to be done, to pay the price that needed to be paid, you know, for you to be able to come out of all of this?
So I would say that, when you're between the devil and the deep blue, a man's got to do what a man's got to do.
Okay.
And for me, it wasn't an option because it wouldn't have been fair
Okay.
on my daughter.
And your daughter.
So everything was linked to her. My older sons were old enough; they could rough it out. But this child, you had an option to let her go. You said you have her, then you give birth to her and cause her
now go.
and go.
Yeah.
So for me, I always say that except you are motivated, something bigger than you must push you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something it's often transcendental. It's outside you.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking I'm not going to die. As far as it lies within me. I mean, everything depends on God. You know what I mean? But what I need to do to be well, I'm going to do it. At least for this child.
Fantastic.
So I would say to most young people, find your motivation. What has died in a lot of people is actually motivation. Because many of us are living in the moment. Everything has to happen now. It's a fast-paced life. I have to blow. It has to happen now. It's got to be, And I'm thinking, long term, long term, because a lot of the things we go through at a price, I actually do empathize with your generation because life is so fast-paced.
Yeah, it is.
And it's as if I feel we haven't been very fair to you people. You know what I mean? Yeah. I feel that we've put you under a lot of pressure. A lot of my generation had to work very hard and very fast. So we didn't pay a lot of attention to younger people, to put values, mentoring, explain to them the things that really matter. And now, unfortunately, social media has taken over and is now feeding them and making their lives even faster. It's like they are living on a treadmill. And a lot of these things are impacting their health, And sometimes you're wondering, what is chasing you? What is chasing you?
Wow. Okay. So in your work as you work in the UK right now, and you work with sub-Saharan Africans, a lot of them young people.
Yeah.
So what have you noticed? I mean, in your work with young people, what can you say at the, from a, psychological perspective, what can you say are the biggest battles that young people are fighting now?
I don't want to sound like a psychologist, but I want to say anxiety. They are under so much pressure. Various things are chasing them. If you live in the UK, for instance, you're ethnic minority. No matter how educated you are, if there's a whiter person than you, they get the opportunity. You come back to Nigeria, other things are chasing you.
Everything is chasing
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So number one, I feel I feel a lot of compassion for them. When I grew up, there was, like I mentioned to you, siesta.
Yeah.
There was a time to just curl up and just be normal. I could leave my children with my neighbor and go off, and I'm sure the child will be fine.
Yeah.
So the equilibrium of life has not tilted in their favor.
Yeah.
That's number one. And then number two is do you want me to be social media? Social media has yes. It's distorted so many things for them. And they're so young, they're so gullible and impressionable. There's a breadth of knowledge without any depth. So many of them have too much information and yet no context.
True.
No context, no life experiences so for instance, you hear, you see you see someone that lives in Ikoyi, you don't know the person has leverage. You don't know that the starting point for you and the person are not the same. Somebody talks to you about soft life and you think the person woke up and soft life started. So there's information and there's no context. Those are the things that worry me. And those things put even full-grown men and women are under pressure. Are struggling with peer pressure. So what about the younger ones, less experienced? You know, the illustration I often use is old women are struggling to wear ashwebi for party, and they are quarreling with their children for peer pressure. Ashwebi that you can't afford. Is it not peer pressure that's making you buy it?
Exactly.
Weddings you can't afford. Is it not peer pressure that's making you have it? Funerals that, you know? So these are the values we're passing on to these people. And they're, you know, it's just, the anxiety that they face is a lot.
It's a lot.
It's so difficult living in today's world.
Okay, so as we try to wrap this up, I want to ask, you know, so, you know, we started from your story, you know, from when you were 13. And like I said, there are many young people, now in their 20s, their 30s, and they've been through a lot. They went through a lot, you know, as children. Maybe not the same story, but, you know, in different forms, you know. And these things are showing up in their lives. How do we deal with, because I've always talked about the fact that around here, most people we don't see the psychologist, you know, we don't, maybe because they're too expensive, maybe because
they're just not available, actually.
They're not available, yes.
Because a lot of my clients I still retain from Nigeria, even though I live in the UK. Most of my clients are virtual from Nigeria because there's even nobody to refer them to.
Nobody. True. And also I think there's something about our culture that, you know, when we talk about psychologists or therapists, you know, people think that, you know, you have to be crazy to see that kind of person. And people don't talk about their issues. People are not even aware that these things they've been through are affecting them. So how does a young person, you know, how does a young person deal with that? So if you notice that the things showing up in your life, there could be behaviors, actions, habits, there are certain patterns, and you can trace it to your growing up and some of the experiences that you had, you know. So how does a young person deal with that?
And this is one of the things that are fast going out of fashion. And that's one word, and that's the word I call authenticity. I always say to people, own your story. My one of the critical steps I took towards getting better was instead of remaining ashamed, right, of my health condition. And I'm sure you know the stigma that is attached to seizures, and it's a taboo subject. In fact, if you have seizures and those kind of things, you're considered demon possessed, right? But I learned to own my story. I had to authenticity, transparency. This is what I am dealing with. Identify, and then you can confront. Identify that, you know what, when I see other people, I feel intimidated. When you can identify that, when you now want to become aggressive, you understand, okay, it's actually because I'm feeling insecure. That's why I'm behaving the way I am behaving. When you can be authentic and honest with yourself, I think 80% of the problems are solved. The only other thing you now need is help to unlearn and relearn and negotiate the skills. The critical thing is to own your deal. It's what it is.
So, in other words, self-awareness.
Self-discovery.
Self-discovery. Okay.
Self-discovery. Why am I behaving the way I'm behaving?
Okay.
What effect? Why that statement that was made? Why is it so? Why
did I react that way?
Why did I react? What did it trigger? What did it remind me of? You know what? After I lost my mom, I had to change schools. Yeah, part of it. So I could be closer to my sisters and be able to mind my sisters. And the school I went to, there was a lot of bullying. For some reason, they couldn't stand me. And they made it very plain. I don't know why. Now, this was one of the most vulnerable periods in my life. There were these things. They used to make caricatures of girls, and then they'd pick on, and it was a co-ed. And this was the first co-ed I was going to as a teenager. They'd make caricatures. They called them cartoon. They called them press club. They would draw. Now I found out that actually it's the girls that they admired that they took. They'd say all sorts of horrible things. They draw you as a witch. Horrible things. I didn't realize that I struggled with rejection as a result of that. I struggled with very low self-esteem. My husband, when I got married, my husband would say, "Why are you always looking? Can't you pass a mirror without looking?" Why? Why does it take you how many hours to dress up? Miles, I never considered myself attractive because of those experiences. And don't forget that they happened to me at the most vulnerable periods in my life.
Yeah.
What I needed was nurturing, acceptance, love, and kindness. And I got the total opposite. So I was jarred. I was a mess. Oh, I pity that man that I married. He must have seen Pepe.
Wow.
Everything for me was an accusation. I had to defend myself. I had to. I just had to overdo, Sha. Until I told you about that message I heard, healing of memories, and I'm like, oh gosh, there's something off here. Why are you always defensive? Why do people's opinion matter so much? And introspections began. And I said to myself, you know what? You actually do like people's opinion. You actually do play to the gallery. So can you just stop this attitude of, I don't care what anybody says. I don't care. No, that's not true.
You do care.
You do care, and you care a whole lot. So identifying that actually set me free.
Okay.
I said, okay, it's important, people's opinion. And I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't matter. So I made up my mind to put around me people that give me good vibes.
Right affirmation.
People that were quality relationships. For instance, I've had the same best friend for the past 45 years. Does that make sense? I have my resource people in my life. I form quality relationships, all right, but I'm very careful because what people say to me matter to me, and I don't even want to pretend that I don't care. I don't take nonsense. I care, and because of that, I'm mindful about how I manage my life situations.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I think the first thing that everybody needs to do is identify, own your story, own your vulnerabilities, own your anxiety. Just identify that this is what I deal with.
Okay.
Then you can get to the root before you start running around the symptoms.
Okay. So my last question would be, what would you tell your younger self?
Can I be very, very honest?
Yes, please.
I'd say to her, Chiadi, you were a superstar. You did well. Things didn't pan out exactly the way you would have liked them to. But kudos to you. You hung in there and you did well. With the resources you had, you've done exceptionally well. For a very long time, I beat up myself in so many different directions. Can you believe that I only actually finished with my mom's death about 5 years ago?
Wow.
Yep. I only actually finished. And it was like catharsis. I wept. That was actually the first day I released her. That was the day it ended for me.
Wow, that's deep.
I kept on thinking, have I made her proud? Have I done well with my sisters? Is she happy with me? Oh God, those memories were so alive. But about 5 years ago, I obtained closure. For about 3 days, I cried.
Wow.
And I just said, you know what, Chiadi, even if nobody else tells you, You did well.
Wow, fantastic. Okay, so this is the last part of the podcast. I'd like you to look at this camera right here,
Okay.
and I'd like you to talk to that young person who is dealing with a lot from their childhood, and maybe it's affected them in many ways. It's affected their self-esteem. They can't really move forward because they're still tied to where they're coming from. And I want you to speak to that person, give that person some words of encouragement, and yes, just pour out your heart.
Okay, so I always say, especially in therapy, because I do this quite a bit, I always say, imagine that little child. Imagine the things she wanted to say that she couldn't say. Tell her that she couldn't say it because she was too little. Explain to the child that children don't fight the kind of battles they've had to fight. Explain to the child that children are meant to be nurtured. Children are meant to be children. Children are meant to have mommies and daddies taking care of them. And say to the child, that time is over. This is now. That was then. Explain to the child that you made it. You did well. You finished strong. You must remember that you were just a child. But this is now.
Wow, thank you very, very much. So we've come to the end of today's episode, and I think that this has been very therapeutic. If you ask me, I think that a lot of us need this. I mean, many of us are battling from the demons of our past. We're dealing with things that we have not really dealt with, and some of us might not even be aware. That's the big thing. So I think that this episode is really what to do with this is a lot of introspection. You need to look deeply. And the reason some of us are not able to make certain strides, the reason some of us are still battling with low self-esteem and you're feeling like you're not good enough or you're not worthy or, things like that, it's because you haven't been able to deal with things from the past. You haven't let go of things from the past. And I think that one of the biggest things to take away from, Dr. Chiadi's story, I mean, having to deal with everything she dealt with and how that showed up later in life. But she had the resilience, One of the things I took away was that when you really have something to lose, and I think that's what happened to you in that moment, the fact that you would have lost the opportunity, to give your daughter what you didn't have, you would have lost that opportunity. When there is something to lose, sometimes it just forces us to have the discipline, the commitment to pay the price that needs to be paid. To take that step to change our lives, to move forward, to make progress. And so this is quite deep because a lot of us are dealing with a lot of things. Maybe on some other episode, I'll talk about my own childhood trauma and how I was able to overcome it. But this is really deep, and I hope that you found a lot of value in this. Thank you so much, Dr. Chiadi Ndu. We've learned a lot. This is, even for me personally, this was really important. It was deep and it was important. I would please we'll have Dr. Ndu's social media handles across the screen right now, so you could always reach out to her. You could please say something in the comment section. I'd like to interact with you. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe, like, comment, share. And every week we'll bring you, value. We'll bring you deep, insightful conversations. And so once again, I'd like to appreciate our guest today.
Thank you, Miles,
for taking out your time to come.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you too for staying tuned to us. All right.
Thank
so till we meet next time, stay intentional. Bye.